Upon the sacred, dust-red plains, where the ancient world breathed its first breath, the sun descended like a fiery clay disk, and mythic silence settled on the jagged horizon. The shadow of a spirit stirred, acknowledging the twilight of its dominion. Behold the Alpha King, whose mane bore the turquoise spirit of his ancestors. His eyes, amber pools of ancient knowledge, swept over the vast territory. A silent tremor warned him. The sacred boundary had been crossed by a threat. This was the Challenger, a beast of untamed, dark clay power, seeking to overturn the ancient order. He moved with the reckless ambition of raw steel. With a guttural, death-shaking roar, he signaled his intent. The law of the wild demanded blood. The ruling Alpha began his measured march. A storm of millennia-old survival knowledge brewed within his calm facade. Experience was his shield and his deadliest weapon. He would yield nothing to the reckless fire of the intruder. In that suspended, breathless moment, the Titans stood meters apart, locking gazes of destiny. Strategy, courage, and fate hung suspended in the air. The long silence ended. This was the moment of collision. The first strike was a primal, thunderous collision of bone and spirit. Manes tangled, claws slashed. The shockwave of their fury rippled across the sacred boundary line. The brutal dance of sovereignty had begun. The king absorbed the brutal impact, not with brute force, but with calculated deflection. He used the very terrain as a weapon, guiding the fight to the ancient rock. Experience bought him a vital, tactical second of advantage. The Challenger, driven by raw instinct, countered with a desperate, sweeping low attack. But the king, swift as the desert wind spirit, soared above the strike. His agility preserved his reign for one more breath. Mid-air, the king turned the avoidance into an unexpected counter-strike. His powerful hind paw raked the Challenger's flank. Wisdom had found a vulnerability. The superficial wound was a lesson etched by the king's tactical spirit. The Challenger recoiled, raging against the cunning maneuver of the king. His fury was a wild, burning fire that consumed his judgment. He stomped the earth, unleashing a violent spirit tremor of raw and tamed power. The king stood patiently, a monument of composed authority. He knew that rage was a weakness the spirit could exploit. His slow, deliberate step forward was an invitation to a fatal, impulsive blunder. Falling for the king's fate, the Challenger launched a powerful, yet predictable, charge. His aggressive pride blinded him. The king sidestepped with fluid grace, leaving the Challenger's vulnerable side exposed for the judgment. With devastating precision, the king drove his massive, turquoise-marked shoulder into the Challenger's exposed ribs. The tactical blow stole the Challenger's breath and momentum. He was thrown, stunned and disoriented, to the clay ground. The king stood over the defeated, yet he offered the grace of submission. He fought not for carnage, but for the sacred principle of order. The law of the Alpha demands respect, not death. Rise and yield, or perish. The Challenger struggled beneath the weight of pain and pride, fighting the instinct to surrender. But the survival spirit took hold. His defiant gaze slowly broke, acknowledging the bitter truth of the king's dominion. In the ultimate, painful gesture of yielding, the Challenger slowly turned his head, exposing his throat to the victor. The Alpha spirit was defeated, but the beast survived. Submission secured the life of the vanquished. The king passed the downed form, casting his final, massive shadow of sovereignty over the fallen leader. The territory was sealed by his passing. A new, reaffirmed order had descended upon the ancient plains. The Challenger pushed himself up slowly, avoiding the king's gaze. He began the walk of exile. The law of the Alpha demanded that the banished carry their pain and shame far from the victorious lineage. From his symbolic throne, the king raised his head to the fading light. He unleashed a final, deafening roar of triumph that claimed the land and echoed the authority of the ancient spirits for miles around. The sun set upon the Challenger's pride, fading like the memory of his reign. His figure became small and distant, retreating into the lonely horizon. The chapter of the past was finally and irrevocably closed. The king moved like the silent wind spirit, executing his decisive strike with lightning speed. He aimed his powerful jaws precisely at the Challenger's vulnerable injury. The targeted blow was the brutal culmination of wise strategy. The challenger's mighty roar was one of shock and mortal pain as his strength gave way. He collapsed beneath the king's strategic force. The first shadow of final defeat was reflected in his wide, disbelieving eyes. The king stepped back, allowing the challenger to absorb the judgment. He issued a final, deep rumble of his authority. The purpose was clear: concede the territory and the crown, or face extinction. The challenger clung to the ground, every muscle straining, every breath a ragged gasp of pain. His will was a defiant flame. He raised his head, locking a final look of unyielding pride with the king. The moment of ultimate submission arrived. The challenger slowly exposed his neck to the victor. A silent, sorrowful whimper marked his defeat. The spirit of the alpha yielded for the sake of survival. The king, victorious, strode past the vanquished form. His shadow swept over the challenger, a final, symbolic eclipse of his rule. He ascended his mound, the undisputed ruler of the domain. The challenger struggled to rise, wounded and ashamed, commencing his solitary path. Exile was the decree of the ancient law. He carried his burden and his bitter wisdom away from the life he had lost. Upon the earthen throne, the king poured his victory into the night. His roar, a voice of absolute authority, resonated with the ancestors. The dominion was claimed, the peace of the pack restored. With the easy confidence of absolute power, the king patrolled the newly reaffirmed boundary. His scent marked the territory. His shadow proclaimed his might. The sovereignty of the lineage was secured. The challenger faded into the distant haze. The sun set on his pride, but the eternal spirit offered a promise. Defeat was a harsh teacher, shaping him for a new destiny. Under the soft, spiritual light of the full moon, the king returned to his pride. His battle-worn authority melted into tender protection. The nuzzle was the reaffirmation of the primal bond. From the darkness, a small cub, the future, watched the solemn exchange. The sacred law, the cost of the crown, was inscribed upon its young spirit. The lessons of survival endure in the shadows. The king lay down, the weight of his vigil evident even in victory. A subtle crack in his turquoise beat showed the battle's toll. Yet, he rested secure, protected by the circle of his loyal lineage. The exiled challenger found solace in a dark pool. He drank deep, but remained wary. Looking into the water, he saw the reflection of a fierce, scarred warrior spirit, still unbroken by hardship. His stride was now defined by a renewed, quiet determination. He walked not from failure, but toward an unknown challenge. The path of the exile is the forge where resilience and new purpose are made. Upon the king's mound, the smallest cub mimicked the victory roar, though only a tiny squeak emerged. Yet, its shadow was colossal. The lessons of the alpha begin early. The cycle must continue. The king sensed the cub's gesture from afar, a flicker of acknowledgement in his closing eyes. The true ruler guides the next generation with a silent, ever-present wisdom. His vigilance never truly sleeps. Harmony descended upon the king's domain. The pride slept, embraced by the moon's spiritual light. A protective glyph circle formed around them. The cosmic balance of the ancient law was fulfilled. The challenger faced a perilous ravine, the landscape reflecting the hardship of his path. He slipped, caught himself, and pressed on. The price of failure is steep, but the spirit of resilience is absolute. He paused, looking up at the moon, the same celestial eye watching his rival. Though their paths diverged, the spirits of the alphas were forever linked. He planted his paw, claiming his new, solitary ground. The king awoke with the dawn, the rising sun affirming his renewed destiny. He stretched and looked across his domain. The vigilance of the true ruler is perpetual, even after the battle is won. The challenger marched onward. His wounds, now clean scars, were the roadmaps of his spiritual growth. He faced the new mountain, his sole companion of fierce, enduring anticipation of his own future. To leaders to pots, the king held his power on the soft, sacred clay. The challenger forged his on the hard and forgiving rock. They were bound by the same eternal law of struggle and purpose. The landscape dissolved into a spiritual canvas, inscribed with the glowing glyphs of their tale. The victory and the defeat were won. The two alphas stood back to back, facing the unending challenges of the cosmos. The majestic sky transitioned from the sun's earthy clay to the deep turquoise spirit of the evening stars. The final, silent saga concluded. But the spirit of the Alpha endures in the cosmic cycle without end.